Hello, good evening. I'm VELMA Vale. It's my job, it's part of my job, and I don't do it very often, but when I do it for a reason, like tonight. It's a charity night. It's my ultimate mask. And yeah, I just enjoy doing it, and I can be someone else for 5 hours and have nice wigs like this.
No, people with, you speak to most people with any kind of mental health issue and they'll talk about the mask. And we get very, very good at putting a mask on things. And even when in your head, it's sort of, your world's literally crashing around you, you get very, very good at making sure nobody in a million years would know that there's anything wrong. It frightens me, to be honest. It frightens me. It frightens me to think that other people could get to that state, and people are committing suicide every single day. And I just think, I totally understand where they're coming from, but it's frightening to think that I was there. I really, really wanted to go. It sort of started around the time I had my when I had my daughter. That's when sort of things started to, not go wrong, but noticeably things changed in my head, obviously. Way back then, I don't know if I could deal with the responsibility. I suppose it was that male bravado thing. I wasn't getting the attention. And I think that's how it sort of, especially the self-harm side of things, that's how it sort of started manifesting. It was attention seeking initially. I think obviously the depression had started to creep in, the mental health issues had started to creep in, and I'd never really known how to deal with it. Obviously I used to drink heavily and I used to get angry, never violent, just sort of, had issues with the way, everything was the world's fault, it was never my fault. And then obviously the attention seeking with the self-harming crept in. Yeah, that became my coping mechanism, the sort of self-harming, the cutting myself, overdosing, mostly. I'm absolutely convinced that I was doing the right thing, because it's illogical. It's an illogical illness. It doesn't make sense. You could be the happiest person in the world and there'd be something still there in the back of your head if you for whatever reason. I think initially it was never really to kill myself. It was like, I think it was sort of more of a spontaneous thing. It's like, I'm going to kill myself and sort of cut my wrists, or take a massive overdose. Sort of knowing, I wouldn't even go as far as say subconsciously, because consciously I knew that what I was doing probably wouldn't kill me. But then again, it manifested over the years.
How many times did you attempt to take your own life?
Serious, genuine attempts. It would possibly be, I could honestly say about 2 or 3 times. This one particular time, I don't really know where my head was going, but I'd absolutely convinced myself 100% that was it. I had for about 2 weeks stockpiled vodka, I'd stockpiled prescription medicines, I'd Google mapped remote areas in Lincolnshire and found somewhere incredibly remote. I'd done the whole suicide note thing via text message and whatnot. Went out there and started doing what I'd done, taking the cocktail of tablets and alcohol. The one thing I didn't realise was with a mobile phone, which obviously I turned it off because I didn't want any interaction with anyone, I didn't realise that it could still be tracked whilst it was turned off, which is why I'm here now talking to you, because what I had with me would have killed me. I sort of came round properly and people were sort of telling me stuff and how panicked they were, and sort of a big police search and stuff like that, But you don't think of those things at the time, you don't think that anyone's going to care enough to come and look for you, Yes, it is attention seeking, but not in the derogatory way where most people think, they just want some sympathy. They don't want sympathy. It's a cry for help, People can get quite nasty. You know, they say you're a drain on the NHS and, you know, why don't you kill yourself and just go ahead and do it. It's like, okay.
What would your advice be?
Well, talk to somebody, whether it be somebody that you know would understand, or whether it be, like I just said, go and talk to a doctor.
I'm Abby Linda and I'm 16 years old. It was mainly just like, well, it started with like my friends being quite, like, girls are not very nice sometimes. It started with like arguments, and obviously then that was kind of having an impact on my life. But then it really kind of got worse when I started running into bullies, like, who were being really quite mean. I was about year 9 when it like started for the first time. It kind of got to like where the boys started picking up like people being mean to me. So in lessons they would start like calling me names and like pointing me out for things and stuff like that. They mostly called me fat. That's like the main thing that they called me. At that age you're kind of like self-conscious anyway, so when people say it, it kind of makes it worse. At the start I was kind of like, I didn't really tell anyone because I thought if I told someone it would get worse. Well, I knew I had people that I could speak to, but kind of being in that place, you kind of feel like you can't tell anyone, even though it's better to tell someone. I had friends in my lessons with me, but they thought that I was okay with it because I was joking and I was laughing along with it, so they thought that it wasn't getting to me when it was.
Things must have changed quite dramatically for you when you began to self-harm, is that right?
Yeah.
When did that begin?
It was probably like around halfway through year 9, so probably about 6 months after the bullying like properly started. Just kind of like scratching, if that makes sense. Usually it was like with a hair grip or something like that. Probably until I started going to CAMS, it was kind of like a regular thing. Before I went to CAMS, I actually took an overdose and then I ended up going to hospital. Like, everything felt really stressful and I don't know, I just didn't really want to deal with the bullies anymore. I do regret it, but I think if I hadn't done it, then it might have gotten even worse because, like, no one would have known about it if I hadn't done that.
I was working at the hospital. I'd just come home from a night shift, so I got Abby off to school as I usually do and then go to bed for a couple of hours. I just got into bed and got a phone call from school saying I think we need to take Abby to A&E because she's taken an overdose. Well, my heart fell to the floor because I didn't know what to think. It was just that horrible feeling of like when your mouth goes dry and you don't know whether you feel ill or... I did feel devastated. I still do if I think about it now. It's heartbreaking as a parent to see what your child has to go to get help. I was going into school, getting nothing there. I think I was at school more than Abby was. And they said they'd look into it and nothing ever came of it. They suggested that Abby had counselling at school, so she did that for a couple of months, and then it just stopped, so it was just taken away. They obviously didn't have enough counsellors to accommodate everyone, so it was just little short, sharp bursts of it, which is not enough really. We then went and had private counselling, that we paid for ourselves, because we thought at that time that was the only option that we had. To go to see a GP is obvious that something is not right. To see those marks on Abby's arms as a parent, you know, that sets alarm bells ringing because you know that that's not right. So you go to your next best option, which is your GP. And then to be sort of sent away with a flea in your ear, they said they would refer us to CAMS. So we waited, I can't remember what length of time it was, and then we got a letter from CAMS saying that at this moment in time we don't feel like, you know, your need is big enough to come in and see us, so you just feel so deflated, and you think, well, you know, for someone to go to those lengths to do that to themselves is not right. Yet if you go into the professionals to seek professional help and then you get turned away, what are you supposed to do? What is the next step? When Abby was admitted to hospital, it then became a safeguarding issue. She wasn't allowed home until, you know, a member of the team of CAMS came to see her in the hospital. So that makes you feel an absolute failure as a parent. It makes you feel like it's your fault. You know, the fact that it becomes a safeguarding issue as soon as that happens. I know they have to do that, but the fact that we had been crying out for help and going to whatever, you know, or wherever we needed to go to get that help, yet a person or a young adult has to resort to that to actually get help. I find it absolutely disgraceful. It disgusts me.
So I'm Sue Alcock. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist by background. I've been with LPFT now for the past year. That's been an interesting challenge as medical director. LPFT, which is Lincolnshire Partnership Foundation Trust, is a specialist mental health and learning disability trust. So it specialises in providing access to people that need specialist mental health services. Before I worked here, my clinical practice, I actually spent 10 years working with women whose primary sort of presenting problems were around how to manage self-harm and self-injurious behaviour. And I always remember one of my key sort of, everybody has these what they call light bulb moments, and I went to a conference that had been organised by patients with lived experience. This was about 10 years ago, and I always remember this lady who stood up at the front and talked about how she managed her own self-injurious behaviour, what it was about for her, and she gave a very clear account, which as a doctor I hadn't had that sort of experience in my training, that hadn't been given to me, and hearing it from her and what she wanted from services actually had a huge impact. So I suppose for me, when I think about LPFT, what we do is we offer specialist help for patients who do have mental health conditions such as depression, schizophrenia, bipolar affective disorder, personality disorder, a whole range of different sort of medical conditions. But what we need to do, and what we are trying to do very much, is to think about what is it that the patients with lived experience want at the centre of that. One of the things that's been proven, so there's a project called the Zero Suicide Project, is that one of the biggest things you can do is actually ask somebody if they are having thoughts about hurting themselves in a sensitive way. But there is a huge body of evidence that people, be it mental health professionals, be it, you know, people, friends, colleagues, whoever it is that you're talking to, are really scared to ask that question. So what we're trying to implement as part of our suicide prevention strategies is an absolute focus on it is everybody's responsibility to just check out that somebody that you come across is okay. 25% of people at one point or another in their life will have some form of mental health condition. We all need to understand that and be able to not say, oh, go to specialist mental health services. We need to help signpost people. When I started in the trust, I have to say I thought it was vital that we did have our own trust suicide prevention strategy, because it's been talked about for the last 2 years. There's been, you know, a lot of work, a lot of reports published by the government. So actually for us to sit down and really think, looking at the trends for our patients, what is it we need to do differently? And even just by doing the work, it's meant that people are starting to talk about it much more. If we just get one more person out there thinking, actually I am having a bad day, this is, you know, it's okay to talk about suicide, the fact that I'm feeling like that, and actually it's much more common than, you know, most people, because when you talk to people who have had these thoughts, they will say it feels like they're the only one that it's ever happened to, and, you know, people will view them as strange or something like that if they start to talk about it. So for me it's about what can we do to destigmatise it, what do we do across the region, and so that hopefully will be published in the near future, and we'll have an idea, you know, more of a global idea in Lincolnshire about what we do. I'm always going to say we could always, you know, benefit from having more staff everywhere. That would be great, but that's not the reality. And the staff in the crisis teams, I have to say, are working incredibly hard. We have put additional staff in to crisis teams recently because we've recognised the patient need.